So, Lisa and all of you, thank you very much. And the committee, thank you for inviting me. I also have to thank my nephew, Zach, who is here at Cambridge, and he and his younger brother, who's also here at Cambridge, insisted that I absolutely meet Lisa, who's been tireless in getting me here. I really appreciate that. What I'd like to do is something slightly different for you today. I want to show you a framework for thinking about your businesses and how you create a sustainable industry. And I want to show you the good and the bad and the ugly of our industry, and you have a chance to change it. I have been trying to change it for years. You now, in front of you, each one of you can make a contribution. And it is the best of times and the worst of times. On the one hand, we have an extraordinary industry. And how many of you have heard how bad it is? Hold up your hands and be honest. Oh, I'm surprised. Come on up here, Sophie. I also had the pleasure of starting my medical career here and having done a DPhil with Stanley in Oxford. So I balance my thinking on science and medicine. So everything you're going to hear in this presentation is where that balance leads me to in my career. And hopefully I can offer you some tools that might be useful to you. It is the best of times. It's a remarkable period of time for medicine. And yes, I do have an American perspective, but 90% of all of the major medicines that are currently being sold come out of the industry in America. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be consumed elsewhere, but understand they do come from there at the moment. And those of you in New Zealand, yes, I've been there. And yes, I've tried to do lots of great things in having to improve milk in cattle. And there's lots of really good stuff there. But it is the best of times. Without a doubt, there is extraordinary changes happening. The impact that you see on the life expectancy of individuals is remarkable. And it's largely due to new medicines. That wasn't the case in the early 19th century. Housing changes led to the most significant decline in tuberculosis in New York City. Simply change in the number of people allowed to live in a room. Today, it's medicines that have the impact. And the impact on the economy is dramatic. If you think about curing cancer, what that might mean is quite extraordinary. Just imagine where those dollars could flow, where those pounds could flow, where those euros could flow in an industry, out of the industry into the economy, helping each one of you. And in third world nations, hugely impacted by diseases, where those dollars could go. Just develop those nations. But it's the worst of times, but it's not new. Take a look carefully at that slide. The middle one, 1917, what were they selling? Morphine. And there's a little comment in that which says, gee, it's the most important medicine that we have. A little bit lower, they talk about mercury, but that's for a different kind of disease. But it was then. But since then, the cacophony's gone on in a way which is extraordinary, and it is going to get worse unless you understand how to deal with this. That cacophony is dramatic, and it's increasing. It will have impact on policy, the amounts of dollars that go anywhere. And Virginia, this morning you mentioned the reduction in monies coming into the types of research that's so important. This is the basis for it. The people in the street are telling their policymakers, gee, this is a terrible industry. That's got to change. And you can change it. You are the future of the industry. You have an opportunity to change it. We, the ones of us who've been around for a long time, have been saying, gee, don't do this to us. We are spending a lot of money on research. Well, take a look at that cartoon. That's how well that argument has been received. Basically, R&D is rapacity and dishonesty. So that argument does not fly. And yes, we are really disliked. Not as bad as the federal government in the United States. But how can you be worse than lawyers? No, that's not fair. My daughter My daughter, Eve, is today at Columbia in law. So a little bit like somebody else earlier today. And we're an incredibly easy target. Who knows who the chap there is in the hoodie? Yeah, he's a bad guy. Not just a little bit bad, he's really bad. But he's trivial. He's a small-time nothing in an industry that is a great industry. And yet, look what happened. The press seized on him. They made him iconic, and he isn't. There are great leaders in this industry, people of extraordinary kinds, people who go in every day to the laboratories and fail. We heard about failure. They go in every day. How do you go in and fail every day? And yet, they make this guy, this character, the punch bag. He shouldn't be anywhere close to us. And when you talk about iconic, it's not as if we don't understand how we're seen. These are the words of a remarkable man, a man who led a great company, a man who I have the deepest admiration for, Roy Vagelos. Read through that for a minute and then notice something. He believed that as these great discoveries came, so public perception would benefit us. When were those words spoken? 2004. I was born, most of you were kind of young then. But that's a problem there when an icon can say that, because he was right. The discoveries kept on coming. Look at them. They're amazing. You today heard a tiny bit about immuno-oncology. It's a total revolution. I am proud to have been a little part of that revolution at a time when everybody scorned it. In 2006, they said, that's a useless area. Don't get in it. Don't invest in it. It's stupid. Go away from it. We didn't. We invested it, and today it's a revolution. It's the right thing to do. Gilead is started the cure of hepatitis C. And when you think about that, they took an incredibly brave risk, a $30 billion company buying one company at $11 billion, half the market, with one drug in phase 2 with a 1 in 4 shot of being successful. Tough? That's a decision. That's a decision. And look what they have today. They've just begun the journey. There's an enormous number of HCV patients around the world, this is just obviously America, who can be addressed, and a huge economic burden, huge patient burden relieved. And if you look at the cure rates that are happening, it's staggering. It's just a takeoff. And that's just the beginning. Roy was right. This is just the beginning. The beginning of what you have the advantage of, a fundamental base of science and medicine, which will really be terrific. And that future is meaningful to you, because hopefully people like me will not have to rely on this. But I don't think that's the case. I will have a good chance of having to face the disorder that you see here, Alzheimer's, which is one of several. And when you think about the fact that each family in the United States will have to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars looking after their family members, as you may have to do, as your society may have to do, just imagine that burden. The cost is astonishing. Over $1 trillion to the American society alone for that one disease going forward. An astonishing figure. That said, the opportunity is magical. Just imagine the work that you're doing that could make a difference here. And as we know, just one drug, one treatment that could really delay it just for a little bit. Not cure it. I'm not talking about cure. Let's hope for a cure, but let's believe in a change. 5-year delay. Look at the impact. Thousands and thousands and thousands of patients. Millions of patients will be benefited. Again, money that can recirculate into the industry. But we operate in an incredibly changing environment, an environment which is so dynamic, so hard. And as you enter it thinking about entrepreneurship, as you enter it thinking about new companies, you're going into something which, thank heavens, right now you don't think about too much, but just bear this in mind. the dynamic that we face today is much more complicated than it was in the past. It will be even more complicated for you in the future. Doesn't matter. You're doing the right thing. You're going after the medicines. You're going after the services. You're going after new trees. Wonderful. Loved it. The fact of the matter is, it will be more complex. But this is the backdrop. This is the basis that you operate in. And as you look at that, the question is, where do you turn for the basis of what you do, what each one of you does? Each one of you does something, and you do it for a reason, not because it's something that you do today, tomorrow, but because you do it for a reason. And what I'd like to do is to tell you that you must have a framework for doing this. And that framework is fundamental. When I started here in Addenbrooke's, nearly killed somebody. I was giving him the first drug. It was from a viper venom called Capitan. I wrote my thesis on it. I got a wonderful prize. It was called the Kermode Prize. Kermode. Thank heavens it's spelled the right way. But that patient's blood pressure dropped into the basement. We didn't know very much about the drug. And we were terrified we were going to kill him. The point was, there was only one thought in my mind. How do I help that patient? Because we couldn't control their blood pressure any other way. That was when the dinosaurs roamed. That is many, many, many years ago when I was doing my medicine here. That said, that same philosophy has gone through for the last 25, 30 years for me. And you need a framework. And that framework, in my opinion, for me, let me offer you a tool as you think about your lives, your way that you work in the industry. That tool should involve having a vision, having a core philosophy, and this is the key, a purpose. I'm going to try and explain those quickly in the next few minutes and then give you a chance to ask some questions. As I think about it, you heard this morning from Professor Winter about scientific vision. It's broadly, you must have a vision for what you're trying to accomplish. And don't be shy about combining both your aspirations, and they can be all sorts of things, but you must also have a core philosophy for what you're standing for. You're not there just to make money. Where are you, Francesca? I know I saw you popping in here, because I know as a venture capitalist, you're not just there to make money. That is part of what you do, but you're creating companies. Genentech is a phenomenal company when you think about what they were aspiring to do. They said they were going to do it, they did do it, and then Sophie bought them. And now they're still doing more. But they'd said what they're going to do, and they did it. But as you think about that, it's not just those two aspirations. It's also, you have to think about your values, and then I want to get to purpose, because purpose for me is everything. The core values is fascinating. There's one pharmaceutical company that stands out, as regarded as one of the top 10 companies in all of the United States. It's J&J. 1943, the chairman of that company wrote 4 paragraphs. That's the first paragraph. And when you read that paragraph, it is the foundation of the values that permeate that company. And I urge all of you, go to the web, grab it, take a look at it. They may not always keep to all parts of it, but it has seen them through crisis after crisis after crisis by going back to that. That company is admired. And when I had a crisis in Teva, I made everybody read the business case of how they handled Tylenol and the killing of patients through a terrorist attack by putting poison inside a Tylenol bottle. That case, read it as well. It's a Harvard Business School case. It is fascinating. But it is founded on the values. Now let's get back to my favorite topic. Sorry, got to get you there. It's purpose. And purpose, to me, is something that is non-trivial. I know that you think, what do you mean by purpose? I mean why you actually are doing what you're doing. That your children's children's children will say, wow, my great-grandparent knew what they were doing. They created something that's lasted through hundreds of years, potentially. And there are examples of this. I won't spend time going of that, I can show you company after company that has been successful by knowing what their purpose was. One of the purposes for me is the patient. And here I differ with many of the colleagues in the industry. Do not mistake a patient for a customer. I'll repeat that. Do not mistake a patient for a customer. You have a completely different set of concepts underlying a patient from somebody who's simply buying somebody. How many of you like to take a medicine? And I'm not talking about things that make you happier when you go out with somebody. Or things that might grow my hair. That's not going to be possible. I'm talking about things that you need. How many of you are happy about it? How many of your parents take drugs? Okay? How many of them want to be taking drugs? Okay? Think about it. And then doctors who give medicines to make you feel good, but aren't doing any good. Look at the last point. How many of you have been to a doctor? I've got a cold. Here's an antibiotic. Great. Pretty useless, right? Cells. I think you need to think about the patient. If you consider one from a purely economic point of view, forget what I've just described to you about what I think about the patient, but think about the economics of this. There are example after example of when you do this, something remarkable happens. How many of you know that at early stages of the HIV epidemic, you literally had a handful of pills? It was like going to have supper, except there was pill after pill after pill after pill after pill after pill. And what happened was, gosh, how do you deal with that? Gilead had a really just simple idea. Let's put it into one pill. And they had first had 2 drugs, then they had 4 drugs. Simple idea, but they were thinking about what makes the life of the patient easy. That's innovation. You can say they didn't invent the drugs. No, they didn't. One they did, not the others. But they put them together. Remarkable thinking. So I want to offer, before I end, a quick rational framework. I absolutely believe in innovation. I love it. My thesis is on the thermodynamics of DNA supercoiling. How do you take a meter of DNA and put it into one small nucleus? Love that stuff. Fascinating. And it, by the way, it affects patients. There's a patient called with xeroderma pigmentosa who has a problem of that type. I love having a core ideology. I believe that at the center of all of this, however, we must focus on patients. And if you do, your companies have a chance of really moving into the leadership position that it deserves to be. So, before I wrap up and give you some chance to dialogue and ask questions, let me just say, I want to really hammer this home. This is about individual values. This is about understanding how you translate who you are into a company. So as you think about your companies, as you think about what you're trying to accomplish, don't divorce your values. Don't divorce your purpose. Because if you think about the patient, there's a reason why this becomes important. And it's a very important reason. Remember what I said. The man in the street is everyone. It's the man in the street and the woman in the street and the children in the streets who are your advocates. They're the people who, when you and we as an industry try and establish the validity of what we are doing, they're the community that we should be in partnership with. They're the community that we actually should be trying to bond with. They're the community who, unlike, and sadly for Roy Vagelos so many years ago, over 12 years ago, when he was saying great discoveries will lead to a better appreciation, that won't happen unless we have the patient at our center and the families of those patients as our advocates. It will never happen because those are the people who vote. It's those are people who tell the policymakers it's time for us to understand the role, the economic, the financial, the sociological impact of the kind of things that we're doing. And I would like to offer that to you as my personal framework for the way I work, and perhaps, just maybe, it'll give you some ideas for how you might work. And I'm happy. Now Sophie's going to ask me about the economics of the acquisition of Roche. No. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I got one, Rick. So we're doing something that is different than medicine historically, and offering basically the ability for your own body to make a treatment over long periods of time. But this alters the game drastically in terms of reimbursement, and also the cost. I mean, you think the nature of biologics, where every molecule of aspirin in the universe is the same. It's not true of every molecule of Rituxan. But when you start building treatments that involve altering the person themselves, how do you sell this? Like, in terms, I mean, obviously it costs more, but and you don't need to come back. Like, I don't know if you're here for the earlier talk, but we don't compete with traditional pharma. Once you're treated with this, it's good for years, maybe for life. How do you think this is going to affect public perception, and how do you think it should be managed?
So let me ask you a question in return. How different is that from the moment when Fleming invented penicillin? When before penicillin, kids were dying with a simple infection on the face. What was public perception to that? I would argue that, in fact, by producing what you're doing and showing its benefit, do that first, and we'll figure out the rest after. You need to demonstrate that you can actually change those lives, because if you can change it, from that will flow the dialogue of just what this is saving our society, just how, in fact, we're benefiting from medicine from that. So I don't think that you can think about or project and worry about that in the future. There's a second example. Let me go for this. And this is my industry. I've never seen a projection, this relates to projections, about the success or failure of a drug that's right. Not one, zero. And I've seen hundreds, literally hundreds. Perhaps the most dramatic of these all was the projection that Gleevec, the marketing team, those of you who've not read Dan Vasella's book, I suggest you read it. There's some very interesting little pieces of gobbets in there that are instructive. But the bottom line was, the marketing team at the time said to him, we are not investing, I believe it was $400 million, to develop this drug, which will save 20,000 people. And he said, excuse me? This drug will give them life for 20 or 30 years. We're doing that drug. Now, that was one of the first times that a drug actually attacked a specific genetic disorder and clicked it. So my comment to you is, I have no clue how you're going to deal with it. It's going to be a really fun ride. But I would say to you, history teaches us, follow the patient and do what's right with them, and then figure it out. And challenge the insurers, challenge the policymakers to come against you, because I can assure you a lot of people will be standing with you.
The insurance guys like it. It's interesting. Not everyone else does. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Peter Todorov from AstraZeneca. Now, I don't think there's a pharma or biotech company out there that doesn't stand for helping the patients, focusing on innovation. But then when you look at numbers, top 10 players in this field, they spend more on marketing than they do on R&D. That's not innovation. So what are some of the things that pharma and biotech, they need to stop doing to boost their public perception?
Number one, they don't stand for the patient. There are very few that do. Please understand that the vast majority of management teams grew up under the precept that they would get bonuses for profitability, not for necessarily saving lives. There are exceptions, remarkable exceptions to this. And I think we need to learn from those exceptions. They're the specialty companies, the companies who really have decided that the patient is part of what they do. So if you look at some of the ones that I really admire tremendously, you could look at what Novo Nordisk did originally in diabetes. Incredible. Look what they handled it. Look at Celgene. Companies where you have good examples where they said, we're going to do this, and they did it. In Astra's case, Astra raised prices on statins over a period of time. And now you're changing your image completely. You're going into specialty. You're going into the idea that you can do something different. Astra is following that path. So I think the leaders of today have seen some of the mistakes of the past and are trying to get there. So I admire those who are doing it, and those who are not, let them be relegated to the pile. There will be other acquisitions, and they will get bought. And yes, Sophie will probably buy and disassemble them. And those that are good, the good medicines will be in the hands of good companies, and hopefully yours at that time. For the others, let them go away. You should not hope for their success. The ones who are the walking dead shouldn't be around.
Hi, my name's Angela.
Hello,
hi.
Angela. Sorry, I didn't see you there.
This is, I guess, an ethical question. So some of the pharmaceutical companies have purchased drugs that have been developed primarily by taxpayers' money through research that's conducted, for example, in academia. And yet they justify using R&D as the approach for why they set a high price for the drug. But the reality is that most of that risk-taking was taken with taxpayers' money, so why should we pay again for a drug that we helped develop?
Well, first of all, I think that's not quite the case, okay? I think that the case today is a little different. So I would argue to you, number one, the panoply of where a drug comes from as to where it actually and how you benefit the society is not quite the same equation as to where you're saying. The United States right now, the vast majority of funding comes from companies, vast majority. The FDA, sorry, not the NIH kicked that off a long time ago, but they generated a huge industry. I also don't, so that's number one, I think the sources of it and how you handle it. The second item is no government then has asked the question carefully, if what we invested there, what was our return? They've not done that. They should do. Because when you see that, in often cases, the investment of that country's dollars have led to a vast savings, vast savings. Thirdly, I do not think that pricing has been handled well at all by our industry, not for 1 minute, because it was constantly a case that you would increase your prices 10% per year, irrespective of the benefit to society. That's not a way we can have in the future. It won't be.
So patience, I don't like patience. That's a horrible word. As a verb, it means waiting until someone does something for you. I guess I agree with you that maybe it's not customer, but what we should be doing is enabling people to be able to access healthcare, and that's something that currently isn't there. You know, if you're in a developing part of the world, you're not going to be able to get medicines. And actually, even in the UK, there's still this sort of deference to the clinician. The clinician is always right. Please give me the treatment I need. I think we need a new word for patient. I think we need someone that's enabled to look after their own healthcare and to actually be able to find the right information. Because as you and I both know, there are a number of drugs on the market today that just don't work. And patients are currently told that they will work, but they don't. So they need the right information to access, to be able to drive their own healthcare. And I think that's potentially where the future lies, rather than waiting. Can we find a new word?
I will endeavor to, but English is not my first language, so I'll let somebody else do it. But I agree with you. To your point about patient, you know, I would be happy to find another word, so long as it did the same thing.
Agreed.
I think I'm being told that we're done. Thank you very much for your patience.